Book of the Week 57, Make It Stick by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Mark McDaniel. Make It Stick, the science of successful learning. So I love to learn and I love to improve that memory as well. So this one was right up my alley. So I'm just going to give you a rundown of the main points in here, some of the takeaways that I got out of this. And so just to keep it short and sweet, I'm just going to run right through them. Talking about learning, especially in a school context, like from a textbook, they highly recommended not rereading the text. So let's say if you have a chapter to read and you're going to be tested on it. So you would read that chapter, and then they recommend not to reread it, highlighting it, underlining it, and so forth. Some of the things that are conventionally taught in school, which I definitely did a ton of that. So they recommend, instead of doing that, to read through the chapter and then actually ask yourself along the way, what are the main concepts? How can I apply this to knowledge that I already know? And they're talking about the fact that more effortful recall is better. So constantly quizzing yourself, even throughout the reading, just to keep in mind of the main points. So that's huge, because one of the main reasons why they were recommending that is because when we reread text, we're actually triggering short-term memory, and we think to ourselves, I've got this, I don't need to read it anymore. We think that it's in long-term memory when it's actually just in short-term memory. So the fact of when we actually try to recall things consciously and making an effort to do so, when we're not actually rereading it and having the information right there, when we're actually having to draw it from our brain and remember it, we actually make a lot more neural connections and neural pathways and actually store that information a lot more successfully into long-term memory. So just the act of trying to recall something makes it stick into the long-term memory much better than just simply rereading the text or underlining that same text. So that's a huge one. And they're also talking about the fact that more effortful recall is better. So for example, reading something and then waiting, 30 minutes or an hour, several hours, and then quizzing yourself, just asking yourself, what was that passage about? What were the main points? How does it apply to the stuff I already know? Could I teach that information? So basically just running down a list of those kinds of questions, and it had a list in the book. But another one was solving the issue or solving a problem, trying to solve the problem yourself before they give you the answer in the book. So even if you get it wrong, just make sure that you actually look at the correct answer after you answer that. But instead of just looking at the text, seeing the problem and then looking right at the answer, instead of doing that, look at the problem and then try to solve it yourself, because that just facilitates a lot more of your mind and then will make that a more powerful memory so that you can recall it better. So actually try to solve those problems yourself. And then obviously make sure that you look at the correct answer and then basically adapt, correct yourself if you didn't get the correct answer. They talk about spaced repetition of recall. Like I said, they recommend not a set time frame for doing that, but make that up yourself depending on your schedule. So whether it be reviewing something an hour later or the next morning, or just giving yourself a little bit of time between repetitions, so that again you're not mistaking that short-term memory, that kind of false sense of security that you have it, for your long-term memory that you actually do have it. So spacing the recall will facilitate much more or much better long-term memory that's actually legitimate and will help you a lot more in come test taking time basically. So they were talking about another point along that same line of harder retrieval is better than easy retrieval. And this goes right along with what I was just saying about how when you actually have to stretch and really reach and try to remember things, what were those main points, and then try to connect the dots. If you can remember one, see if you can connect it to the other one, the other main point. So you don't want to wait. Basically, their strategy was you don't want to wait too long between learning sessions or study sessions so that you forget everything, but you do want to forget a little bit so that you can try to remember and really just flex that memory muscle, so to speak, so that you can, again, ingrain it into long-term memory much more successfully. So key concepts or key questions to ask. What are the key concepts? Basically, what could I do better next time? How does this relate to my current knowledge? You can even visualize this, whatever concepts you're learning about, in terms of your own life or make up a fantasy, whatever makes you, that it would make it more real when you visualize something. So that definitely helps as well. And then explaining the keys in your own words. That's huge, of actually understanding the main concepts instead of just reading the book, reading the text, making flashcards, reviewing them the same way, and then basically just having a firm understanding of how just the surface context, but not really the underlying meaning. So, and what I mean by that is, let's say you have to take a test on something. If you just have the surface meaning, you're not really going to be able to change the context of that learning. You're not going to be able to apply it as well. You're just going to know it in that one context that it was presented in the book. So by asking those questions, how does it relate? What are the keys? Can I put it in my own words? And so forth. That really helps you to basically be able to mold that learning into other situations, which makes it a lot better, a lot more applicable to other scenarios. And then that also, just the fact of being able to do that, ingrains it into your long-term memory much more effectively. And then also supplying answers from your own memory. So they're talking about, tests that are multiple choice are much less memory provoking, obviously, than ones that are just fill in the blank. So when you're testing yourself, or if you have an option, opt for the fill in the blank and actually have to, stress your memory to do that. And then they highly recommend taking practice tests, taking practice quizzes, quizzing yourself, explaining the key concepts to other people, bouncing ideas off of each other. So things like that. So not just reading the text, but trying to find different ways of applying it. And they go into a little bit about, I'm sure you may have heard of auditory kinesthetic learning, visual learning as well. And they didn't seem to think that had too much research. Now, I haven't really researched it myself to see how valid that is, to say, this person's an auditory learner, and then that's pretty much their strength. They're not too good at, reading. They're much better at, let's say, listening to an audiobook, for example. So they're saying that there's not too much research in that. There was there was a multiple intelligences theory of 8 different types that they were thinking is better. I don't know too much about that, but you can look that up if you want to. And I guess the last thing that they were talking about was a memory technique. They have mnemonics, and then they also have building, they call them memory palaces. So visualizing different buildings, so learning, and you can even go to a different location to learn a certain topic. This is a little bit extreme, but they did a couple studies where kids actually did this. So they would go to one coffee shop, for instance, and then learn about a particular topic, and then they would go somewhere else and then learn about a different topic there, so that when they were remembering for the test or just even for general life, you can much easier, or recall things much easier when you do that. So you can just think, oh, I was at this coffee shop when we learned about that, and I was at this store or at this coffee shop when we were learning about that. So that's something interesting you could do. And then there's plenty of memory techniques that you can do as well. One of which is thinking about 10 or various numbers of different locations. So one thing you can do is, I used to have a memory technique where I would think about 10 different locations where I would go throughout the day. So let's say bedroom will be number one, so wake up, and then brush my teeth would be number two, so bathroom, and then the kitchen would be number three. So then if you have, let's say, 10 different things to learn, and this is kind of more short-term-ish, but you could also do this with speeches or with general concepts. You can just visualize something that's kind of outlandish or that has to do with the learning, that's really big, that's really memorable, basically, very colorful or very, just out of place. So if it's something about, philosophy, I might visualize Plato, sitting on the other side of my bed or something like that. So that would be number one. And then I would go throughout your day and then have basically each location that you go to in a normal day. So it's really easy to remember the context, and then just have a really powerful visualization so that you can remember that. And like they say, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So that definitely helps with your memory and your recall. So I hope that helped. It was a great book. Highly recommend it. If you're into success, if you're into memory, if you're into learning, it's definitely a good one.